Good evening, everybody. Welcome to your Wednesday, July 15th, 2020 edition of Cyber Insecurity. As always, Neil Bridges here. Whoops. That, folks, is what happens when you have your Twitch stream up in the other window and forget about it. All right, we're going to try that again. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the, whoops, maybe not. All right. Third time's a charm, right? Third time's a charm. So, good evening, everybody. Welcome to your July 15th edition of Cyber Insecurity. Wow, I've got all sorts of windows open. All right. Now we're going to try it again. All right. Fantastic job. Fantastic job. Well, that'll make for some nice blooper reel footage later. All right. Fourth time's the charm, because I was just kidding on the third time, right? So fourth time's the charm. So good evening, everybody. Welcome to your Wednesday, July 15th, 2020 edition of Cyber Insecurity. As always, I'm your chauffeur for tonight's adventure, Neil. Real quick, I wanted to get a couple of the logistics pieces kind of out of the way. You'll see that we have added a nice little panel over here on the left-hand side of your screen, hopefully. If you like these videos, if they're beneficial to you, hit that follow button if you're watching us on Twitch. Hit that subscribe button if you're watching us on YouTube. Very much appreciate that. Gets you a little bell as soon as we go live. Every time we go live. In addition, whenever we drop videos, which we do after every stream, you'll get a nice little notification that those videos have gone live. Also, want to kind of draw your attention here. We've now started to post the schedule as to what we're going to cover on the stream. And so for the July 15th version of the cyber insecurity stream tonight, we're going to hit some cybersecurity news and discussion. First, we're going to talk about the new Microsoft vulnerability that was released today. Don't worry if you're tuning into us and you're not familiar with DNS and what a vulnerability is or what this means to you. That's part of the reason for the stream here, so that we can try to all learn and educate and grow together in that knowledge. The second topic we're going to hit on the news tonight is they released today the Dark Web Price Index survey for 2020, which goes through and talks about the value of certain things that are for sale on the dark web. And so we're going to do a really quick dark web primer and demystify kind of like the darknet stuff, and really try to kind of bring everybody together and understand that darknet's not that scary, and kind of demystify some of the darknet conversation that's going on. And then finally, we're going to talk about literally something that was released, kind of pretty mainstream right before this stream, which is the Google Confidential Virtual Machines. And that may sound a little techy, but don't worry about it. We're going to, as always with the stream, we'll cover the things that are easy for everybody to understand, and then dive just enough into the technical stuff so that we don't lose anybody. Now, on the other half of the on the stream, after we get through the news section, so right here in this section right here, we're going to talk about a concept known as security through obscurity and why it still exists in 2020. This is a request of a very, very respected cybersecurity engineer that I've had the pleasure to work with out of Italy. We'll kind of do a homage to him and talk about cybersecurity through obscurity and why it still exists in 2020. And then finally, in the last part of our night, this little topic right down here on the screen, we're going to talk about the evolution of open source C2 frameworks. This one's going to be geared towards our pen testers and red teamers, or folks who are interested in getting into to pen testing and red teaming. And kind of what that is, and how those open source frameworks have evolved over the years, how they started, how do we utilize them, and where are some good resources to go and make yourself familiar with open source C2 frameworks. And for those who don't know, C2 stands for command and control, and so we'll kind of walk you through that towards the end of the stream. As always, we'll try to take some breaks. I know this is a long stream, it's 2 hours. We'll try to take some breaks after the news section. We'll take some breaks after section 2, and then close out the stream after that. So, if you can't sit through a stream, if you can't sit through a section of it, don't worry about it. Like I said, we'll do the video after the fact. We'll break them up into small clips, post those videos up on YouTube. You can catch the details of them later. As always, we're multicasting this across all 3 platforms: Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. All 3 chats are integrated, and so as always, please don't hesitate to drop questions, comments, concerns, anything you've got inside the chat room. We've got moderators standing by, to field questions, and then obviously I'll be watching the chat room as well, and I'll field any questions that I see, that we can on stream as well, and we'll make sure that we get our users taken care of. Okay. All right. Cool. So with that being said, we're going to kind of hop over real quick, and we will talk about the new Microsoft DNS vulnerability, codenamed SIGRed. Okay. So when we talk about DNS, it's important for us to really understand what DNS is first. And this is one of the reasons why we do this stream, is because we see this in the news, and there's all sorts of alarms that come off whenever vulnerabilities like this get released. You see the internet really kind of boil over, with just a massive amount of freak out, if you will, when some of these vulnerabilities exist, especially when we talk about vulnerabilities in Microsoft and the guys here at Checkpoint. So Checkpoint is a company, they do a lot of hardware, things like firewalls, things like switches and whatnot. And so, they're doing a ton of research constantly out there to try to identify new threat vectors and new exploits that are going on out there. And so they're a decently respectable company. When we talk about DNS, what we're really talking about is what's known as the domain name system. Now, for those who are tuning in and may not necessarily be cyber savvy, we're gonna kind of level set you on what DNS stands for. For those who are a little bit more experienced, just buckle in and get ready for the ride, because we need to bring everybody along with us, right? So when you look across, usually like the URL bar up here at the top of your browser, in this case I'm using Safari, right? This is what most people are used to seeing when they browse the internet, right? It's a very human-friendly name, right? That's a domain name. What you may or may not necessarily realize is that there's a complex series of ones and zeros that are kind of actually happening on the back end of that domain that allows your computer, when you put in www.google.com, to route your specific request all across the internet so that you can actually get to the Google servers. That ability to convert a common name like google.com to an IP address is what's referred to as a domain name, okay, or domain name system. That's a very, very abstract, kind of analogy for DNS, but I think it works for most people. Another way to look at it is the domain name system that exists out there in the world is basically like a huge, giant telephone book, okay, for every domain that's out there in the internet, whether we're talking about Google, whether we're talking about Microsoft, whether we're talking about Facebook or YouTube or Twitch or whatever the case is. You have to have some way to interpret that human readable name into an IP address. Now let's get a little crazy. Okay, let's get a little technical. Again, not going to scare anybody away, but we're just going to kind of show you, again, kind of to the mantra of demystifying cyber, right? How we want to demystify this. So what do we mean by talking about a domain name, right? We know that this is a domain name, right? But how do we actually interpret that as a domain name? It's very easy. We can use simply like a tool here to make a simple request, and what we get is we get an IP address. So we've just done a very basic phone book lookup. If anybody on the stream actually, still has a phone book or remembers phone books from back in the day, you were looking for somebody's name, you would simply open up the phone book, you would go by alphabetical order, you'd look for that person's name, and you'd see their telephone number, and you'd pick up the phone and you'd call them. That is exactly what we just did here. We needed to know the phone number for Google, and so we asked the internet what the phone number for Google was, and this is the phone number that it gave us. So what happens on your, kind of on the back end for your browser is when you type in www.google.com, that same type of request occurs, and you get a response. And that's what we're looking at here in this image. You as the user make a request. In this case, we're requesting it from Amazon.com. It goes to a server and says, hey, do you know what the IP address is? Hey, do you have this IP address for Amazon.com in your phone book? It either says yes or no. And if it says no, then it goes out to one of these things that's known as a DNS server that says, hey, do you happen to know what the IP address is of Amazon.com? It says, yes, of course I do. I absolutely know what the IP address is. Sends that back to the web server and ultimately sends it back to you as the user. And then you get displayed with in this case, Amazon.com. So with that context in mind, you can really kind of see and understand how the domain name system that we have that's out there pretty much runs the internet, right? If it wasn't for our ability to be able to resolve and match common names, common domain names to IP addresses, you would have to remember this number right here for every website that you wanted to. And that's, if anybody was around back before we, could store contacts in our cell phones and things like that, it wasn't always the easiest job to try to remember all of the phone numbers for all your friends, when you went to go try to call them. And so the DNS records or the DNS system really kind of helps to facilitate that. Okay. And so when we think about this vulnerability, when we think about this SIGRed vulnerability, now it starts to become just a little bit more obvious how detrimental this potentially could be to how it is that we do everything on the internet, right? If an attacker is able to change any DNS record, or in this case, they're able to manipulate a piece of code, right, in a way that allows them to take control over a network, that's effectively what we're talking about here with this, okay? So an attacker in this case, and what I think is also worth noting about this and what we're constantly finding in this cybersecurity space, right, is that this is a 17-year-old bug, right? And that almost sounds, when you say it like that, it almost sounds like you're drinking a fine wine, like, yes, this bug, that's about 17 years old. No, that's a good vintage. Not quite as exquisite when we talk about, exploits and things like that and whatnot inside of a corporate network. And so, this is something that's been around in the Windows operating system, for about 17 years, right? And so basically since about 2003. And so think about where you were in 2003 and think about how long, this has been existing out there, that could have caused, terrible havoc across the entire internet, if somebody had found out about it, 17 years ago. One of the other things that we want to talk about is that while we showed in the demo kind of DNS holistically, this particular vulnerability really only affects Windows DNS servers. Okay, so I don't say that to try to downplay the criticality of this vulnerability by any stretch of the imaginations. When you think about how many Windows machines are out there. I mean, there's a reason why, Windows is a multi-billion-dollar company, is because of its predominance, and its adaptability inside of an organization. But in this case, it at least does limit kind of the plume, if you will, kind of how big that that nuclear blast could be. Because it is only affecting Windows DNS servers. Most of the non-corporate infrastructure, so things that exist out there on the internet, are comprised of non-Windows DNS servers. So really, we're talking about how this could potentially impact an organization. And so right now, when I'm talking, about the impact of this vulnerability, I'm talking to any, CISOs or incident responders or network admins or folks who may be listening to the stream that are dealing with a corporate environment. We're really talking about you and how these types of systems could be used inside of your corporate environment. One of the other things that I want to highlight about this is that they've deemed this vulnerability what we refer to as wormable. And so what exactly does that mean? If we think about wormable, and if everybody remembers back to 2017, right, when WannaCry kind of hit, right, and what happened was one machine began to get infected, and then 50 machines began to get infected, and then 200 machines began to get infected, and that's what we mean by wormable, right? It's the ability for there to be a piece of malicious code that's written that once it's unleashed into an environment, basically continues to propagate throughout that environment without, much, if any, interaction, with the attacker, with the user, with the outside world, whatever the case is. And so when we look at, again, we get back to how big that plume potentially could be. This is one of those times where a wormable type of virus could be, very big, because it doesn't require a whole lot of interaction. Okay. So we've talked about what DNS is. We've talked about why this vulnerability could be incredibly detrimental to an environment. I want to kind of demystify just a couple of other things for those who may be seeing a report like this for the first time, right? Just in case you have never seen this before, right? And again, just to make sure that we've brought everybody along on this journey with us, right? We talk about CVSS, right? It's the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. The NVD, or the National Vulnerability Database, sets these common vulnerability scoring systems, and it's basically a matrix, not like a neo matrix, just like a matrix of, what type of access does it require, how, what type of damage could it be done, what type of access do you need to the network to have this vulnerability be successful. And so 10 is definitely the highest ranking that we have, because it basically means that it's low barrier to entry. It's pretty prevalent, that's out there. It's accessible. It has the ability to affect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of systems and data that exists out there on the network. And so we definitely view this vulnerability as a pretty significant a find and a pretty significant event for all of those reasons. Okay. So as we kind of scroll down here, there's lots to read here, and again, as usual, I'll provide links to this inside the videos as soon as they're over. If you go out there, you can search for the checkpoint report on SIGRed. This can get kind of technical, and so we're not going to go through everything inside of this report, but I kind of want to highlight a couple of the findings on this report. It talks about DNS overview and just some information in terms of how DNS works and why DNS is important. It talks about prepping the environment. So it kind of goes through a lot of this. When we get down here to the vulnerability, and again, for those who may not be used to seeing this level of technicality, don't worry about it. Don't start to have your eyes bleed yet. We're not going to go through this in depth, but what I want to talk about is what type of vulnerability this is. Okay, when we talk about this type of vulnerability, and you can kind of see it right here, and this is the only two words, right? These are the only two words that we're going to refer to, right, as a buffer overflow. This also helps to kind of indicate the significance of how, kind of how severe this bug is. So when we talk about a buffer overflow, I don't have my coffee mug here. I'd use my coffee mug example, but if you take a coffee cup, right, and you start to pour coffee into the coffee cup, the coffee is going to fill into the coffee mug, but then it's eventually going to spill over the sides of that of that coffee cup. That is an overflow type of condition. You have overflown your coffee in the coffee cup, and depending on whether you're at McDonald's or how hot the coffee is, you could end up suing somebody. Old joke for those who remember back before we had caution hot labels on the McDonald's coffee mugs. But that's an overflow type condition because now you've put more into a container than what could be in there. The trick to a buffer overflow type of exploit is that once you get to that overflow condition, instead of just having it overflow everywhere and spill all over your hand, and then you drop the coffee mug and you break the glass and everywhere else, that's what we refer to as a crash. And so typically in a buffer overflow condition, that type of crash is what happens in a buffer overflow condition. The trick and what exploit developers are out there doing is they're taking that overflow condition and trying to control it. And if they can gain control over that overflow condition, then they can make the computer do whatever it is that they want it to do. And that's why this is important, is because they've been able to find a way through this vulnerability to intentionally create an overflow condition so that they can control what happens on the other side, so that they can then gain control of that target environment. And so that's why I bring this up, is because I want to kind of talk through kind of what those buffer overflows are and what that is. And so with that type of condition, with that type of buffer overflow condition, an attacker can now send request to any DNS server, any Windows DNS server, internal or external, and as long as they send the right crafted message, they could cause that DNS server to basically give over control to an attacker, and then an attacker could then gain complete and total network access to a network. And so kind of now that I've walked through that and kind of explained that, again, lots of technical details in here. If you're the type of person that wants to kind of dive deep into the technicalities of this, this is definitely a great article to do so. If you're coming up into cybersecurity and you're looking for something good to read, these types of articles are great for pen testers. These are great for malware reverse engineers, malware, folks who are interested in understanding how malware works. Oftentimes the malware starts with being able to exploit vulnerabilities like this. If you're into bug hunting, these are good reports to read. I would also encourage any of the listeners out there, that are looking at these reports and reading these reports. These are the types of reports that we really should be writing. They're very in depth. They're very detailed. You can see kind of in this section we talk about RFCs, which are as close as we'll get to some standards for how things work across the internet. So this is a really good report to kind of read through and understand, and kind of understand kind of how they were able to secure that vulnerability and get it working. But again, this is new. This literally just came out, I think, late last night. A lot of the documentation hit my inbox late last night and early this morning. I can tell you that if you're on the stream and you're in charge of an organization, or you're looking at your networks, or you have Windows DNS servers in your environment, this is one of those patch now type opportunities. We don't, some of the pragmatic cybersecurity individuals, we'll try to tone when we use that type of, hit the big red button, that this could be pretty bad. This is one of those times where you really want to attack this one, because this one could be pretty bad, and you really want to kind of get in front of this one. Okay. Oh, we got a question in chat. Would this let the attacker hijack a specific record to send a legitimate hostname request to a cloned site meant to steal bank logins, for instance? This could be used for that. This is less about rerouting traffic. I think what you're referring to is DNS cache poisoning. In this specific type of example that they've shown here, this one is about sending a specific malicious payload to a DNS server, and then using that malicious payload to get what we refer to as shell access onto that DNS server. So the DNS process that runs on a DNS server, typically runs as system, which we refer to as like the highest, most privileged, account in an environment. And so that system level user, has access to take over pretty much anything you want to in the site. And so this is more about sending malware, or sending some piece of malicious code to a DNS server so that you can get a shell or you can get a remote control access over that DNS server as a system user that you can then use to take over the entire network. I'm sure you probably could craft something that would then, allow you to shift traffic to a cloned malicious site. But this one is, that would be something that you would do if you couldn't get shell access on a box. This one is so bad, this vulnerability is so malicious, if you will, that I feel like a lot of folks, when they get a working proof of concept for this, and this starts to get very mainstream, outside the patching window, this is one of those where people are just going to go for the jugular, basically, and try to gain system access to the host. But great question nonetheless. All right. So moving on to our topic, one of the next topics that we wanted to kind of talk about was the dark web price index survey for 2020. Now, as soon as me or anybody else starts to throw out the word dark web, a lot of us inside the industry really just kind of start to have our eyes glaze over. That's definitely not my goal with bringing it up here. I wanted to talk, when I saw this come across, and this happened, after Monday's stream, I thought this was a really good opportunity to have a conversation about the darknet and really try to demystify parts of the darknet, try to make it less scary, and I want to kind of show you just how unscary the dark web can be. Obviously, I'll be a good tour guide, and I'll kind of tell you when to keep your hands inside the roller coaster ride, and when not to pet the animals or they might bite you, kind of thing. But I do want to kind of demystify some elements about the darknet, so it's not so scary. Now, yes, eventually we'll get to the dark web price index, and the reason why I want to bring up the dark web price index, there's a misconception by folks who are out there, and this is probably as much for the traditional cybersecurity folks as it is for the folks from Facebook who are watching us, who don't necessarily understand what the value of their personal information is out there on the darknet. There's actually an initiative out there by a company called Privacy Affairs, whereby they go out and price various categories and various things that are being sold out there on the darknet, so that you can understand just how much your data is worth out there. But we'll get into that here in a little bit. One of the first things that again I want to try to cover for everybody is let's demystify some of the darknet. Let's make sure that you're not scared of the darknet anymore, and that whenever the news organizations or your friends or other news articles and whatnot are out there, you're not worried about oh my gosh, this is terrible. Okay, so let's start with what is the darknet. What is the dark web? This is a very common visualization that folks use, right? And so I think it is cliche, it is kind of cheesy, but it's easy to talk about, right? When we think about Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, that's what we refer to as the World Wide Web. So the very tippy top of that iceberg that you see there, anything that you open up your browser and you can get to on a day-to-day basis, is oftentimes what we refer to as the World Wide Web or the clear web. The conversation we just had around DNS, any of those domains, right, they route pretty easily all across the internet because of DNS to anything in the clear. What's interesting about this, and that's that statistic, hopefully that's not too blurry on the screen, but that statistic right there, which is only 4% of the internet content includes these public websites. So only 4%. And just let that sink in for a minute about, how big the internet is, how many websites are out there. You couldn't browse the entire internet, right? You couldn't browse the entire ClearNet, the World Wide Web, in a day. But yet it only encompasses about 4% of the entire internet content that exists out there. And this is oftentimes where we start to get into this concept of the deep web and the dark web. Now, it is, again, demystifying cyber, right? Deep web and dark web, I know that they've got the names here and kind of the breakouts between the deep web and the dark web. I would simply, for the folks who are looking at this, look at the tippy top of the iceberg and then everything else that's underneath. And that's what encompasses what we would oftentimes refer to as the dark web. There are networks out there that truly are, a subset of computers that only have access to each other. For example, this computer can only talk to this computer, or the 6 computers in a circle can only talk to each other. Those are very, very rare networks, and those are some of the hardest networks to crack or to even get into or to even investigate, because they oftentimes require a level of credibility or a level of credentials, or in the case of hacker forums, it's not uncommon for hacker forums to require you to prove your bona fides, if you will, prove your ability to be worthy to be on those hacker forums by doing something malicious. There's these ideas that you have to vouch for somebody, which yes is indeed true. If you knew of a hacker that already had access to those forums and you were trying to get into them and they were willing to vouch for you, that's one way to get into those hacker forums. But typically those hacker forums are looking for you to prove yourself to them by basically doing something malicious. And so looking across the deep web and the dark web, right, and the World Wide Web, this is a pretty good visualization, so you understand that what you see on a day-to-day basis is really, really, really so small compared to everything else that's out there. With that being said, then always comes the question of how does one get to the deep web, right? And I know this is where we start to lose people, right? Because it's like, oh no, I don't ever want to do that. Everybody's got this vision that like to go to the dark web is to like walk down this dark alley where you're probably going to get mugged. And I know that what we see on the media, what we see on the mainstream, really kind of lends itself to treating the dark web like that. But to understand the dark web is understand why the dark web was first created, in the first place. Way back when, the Navy actually created the first concept, or one of the first concepts, one of the first mainstream accessible, I shouldn't say that, one of the first mainstream accessible, versions of the darknet. But it wasn't for clandestine purposes. It wasn't for spies or, anything like that. It was actually because as sailors went to countries like China, to Vietnam, to places overseas whereby they had very autocratic and restrictive governments, the Navy wanted to make sure that as those sailors were communicating via email or chat clients or, even surfing, the web, whatever they were surfing at the time, they had a way to do so that was outside of the prying eyes of some of those autocratic governments. And so the Navy created what we now refer to as the Tor project. And so if you're not familiar with Tor, right, Tor is just a short version of the onion router, right? And the idea behind the onion router, right, is that it's just like an onion, not that it stinks, for those who are Shrek references, right? But you can peel away the different layers before you actually get to the center of the onion. So what does that actually look like? And so this is a really good kind of depiction of what the Tor network actually looks like, right? Where you've got a client that sits out here that makes a request into a bunch of IP addresses inside of this Tor network, but then eventually comes out of the Tor network onto, you know, another server on the other side, whether that's Google, whether that's Facebook, whatever it is that comes out the other side. But as you can see, because of these layers of onion that exist inside of this cloud, you know, it becomes very, very hard to trace the traffic. It's all encrypted, you know, point to point. So like, you know, as this node connects to this node, this traffic is encrypted. As this node connects to this node, it's encrypted, you know, all the way out. And so this is what gives Tor kind of its famous moniker of being anonymous, because if it's done right, if it's done correctly, as your traffic leaves your client here and goes into the network, it gets shuffled around so many places and so many times between all of these anonymous computers that when it comes out the other side, that traffic could source from Russia, from Ukraine, from France, from the UK. It could, you know, source from your backyard. It doesn't have to source from anywhere overseas, and that's what gives people that level of anonymity. And this is what the Navy was actually trying to achieve when they created the Tor network. Now, as Tor has gained adoptability and gained you know, kind of visibility, right, if you will, all across the world, obviously, you know, folks who are intentionally trying to avoid prying eyes have had a tendency to also adopt the anonymous, you know, benefits of the Tor network. And of course, I'm kind of toying around the idea of criminals and cyber criminals. They can use the Tor network to, you know, do their best to try to evade and attempt to hide from, you know, law enforcement that's out there. There are ways around that, obviously, and we can see that when we see big high profile arrests like and seizures of websites like Silk Road and you know, some of the other high profile darknet sites that are out there. But because of the complexity that exists inside of something like the Tor network, it makes it really, really hard for law enforcement to try to get there and to try to shut down, you know, some of these darknet sites. So how easy is it to get onto the darknet? Well, I'm glad you asked, for those who asked inside their head. Okay. To simply get onto Tor, you simply go to torproject.org and you simply download the Tor browser. That's right, for your operating system. And as you can see, they have a Windows version, they have an OS X version, they have a Linux version, and they have an Android version. Okay, and it's simple. It's as simple as clicking on any of these and downloading it. And let's hope that my demo goes as planned. You can see that what happens then is you get a little icon for the Tor browser. In my case, I'm running OS X, obviously. You'll get a little icon for the Tor browser. So if we click on this, you can see that it comes up really quickly with this box where it is attempting to connect to the darknet. Boom. That's it. I'm on the darknet. I don't hear any cops. Nobody's knocking on the door. I don't hear any helicopters. Okay, cool. No ninja. That's it. I'm on the darknet, and no. For a second there, I was really worried that demo was going to fail. But that's how easy it is, and just like that, we're using Tor. You know, in this case now, what I will caution people of, right, is you know, once you're here, you know, this is like, you know, one of those moments where, you know, where do you go from here? It is not uncommon for people to just use Tor completely to surf normal internet. Okay. In this case, I went to a search engine called DuckDuckGo. You know, I did that because, and we'll see if you know, the demo gods shine a light on me or not. Depending on where my exit node is, I may or may not get. Okay, so in this case, I did get a Google one, but you can see that I got looks like Google out of Germany here. It's kind of hit or miss, and I'll be straight, be honest with you, is that you may put in Google here and Google may present you with a CAPTCHA because you may be coming out of a node that has been associated with some malicious activity because you're effectively coming out of the same node that an attacker is coming out of and doing something malicious. And so it is kind of hit or miss sometimes in terms of which service you get. But as you can see, you have access to all the same ClearNet resources that you have access to in a normal environment. It's not scary at all, is it? And so now you're passing all your traffic through the darknet. It's going through this mesh of machines here and then coming out the other side to the Google server. And so Google can't tell if it's you sitting at your home in the States. It can't tell if it's you sitting at your home in France or in Greece or in anywhere else. And so it has to treat you just like whatever user is in that country, which is why you see me getting presented with, a Google from, I think that's German. It looks German. Anybody who's a linguist can probably tell me otherwise. But so that's how easy it is to get onto the darknet. So right now I've got this browser. This browser's on the darknet. Now let's talk about accessing, what we refer to as hidden services. So if we go back kind of to our example, right, we're now passing all of our traffic through and things like that. But let's say that I actually want to access a website. I want to actually access a darknet website that exists kind of in this part of the world, right? This is where we get into this concept of hidden services, right? Because these services don't have normal IP addresses or normal domain names. And I'll kind of show you an example of that here in a little bit, so bear with me. That's why they're hidden, is because they're not routable. The only way to get onto them is with your Tor browser. Okay, that's why they're hidden. And so what does that look like? There's a good site out there, that, well, let's talk about a couple things, right? There is a way that you can look for websites that you can go to. There's oftentimes a hidden wiki, type of web page. That you can go to, and it's got different onion addresses. And so if you look at, right, like this right here, you can see that most, or pretty much all of the darknet sites that are out there have a .onion at the end of it. And so in this case, we've got, DuckDuckGo, which, again, the same one here, duckduckgo.com, that you see me accessing here. You can see that we can also access its darknet version here on the darknet through its onion site. So again, completely legitimate service. This is what it looks like on the normal internet, on the clear internet. This is what it looks like on the onion. Okay? So again, just to reiterate, the one DuckDuckGo that we looked at, duckduckgo.com, is up here. The duckduckgo.onion is down here. And that's how easy it is to browse either through the darknet to ClearNet sites or actually browse inside of the darknet. So let's kind of talk about how easy it is to find darknet markets, right? And so these are the places like Silk Road. These are the places like Agoria or Alphabay, some of the ones that you've heard on the news that have gotten shut down. Let's talk about just how easy it is to find some of these very, very mainstream darknet markets. And so there's a website out there, it says right here, DN Stats. It stands for Darknet Stats or Darknet Statistics. This is one of many sites that actually goes out and scrapes darknet markets that are existing out on the darknet and tracks their uptime. If you're a aspiring cyber criminal or if you're trying to buy drugs, whatever the case is, you really want to make sure that you know what the up and down status is of the particular darknet market that you're trying to shop on. And so this website gives you kind of that status. It's got featured sites here, so these are names of different darknet markets that it is currently tracking the stats of. And so if we were to take a look at, let's go click on markets here for a little bit, you can see that as this comes up, we've got a list of darknet markets here. We've got their statuses that are up, how long that they've, what the percentages that they've been up, and any type of user reviews that may go along with it. We'll pick one that's got a pretty high uptime. That way we don't risk it not being up. So again, you can see that this is definitely a darknet site because of the quintessential .onion domain that's listed here. And so, whoops, that did not work as expected. That was a demo fail right there. Hate it when that happens. Let's try another one. See if this one comes up. All right. Well, that was definitely not supposed to happen. We can see if we can. I'm just going to try one last thing to see if I can't make this one work. Oh, the demo fail is on this guy. The demo fail is on me because I'm trying to connect to it through a ClearNet web browser, right? So again, my failure is you're learning. As I click on this, right, I'm still in my Safari window, right? I'm trying to get to it from the ClearNet. So this browser is not routing all of its traffic through the darknet. And so we can then simply take this web address here, this .onion web address. We can come over here to our Tor browser. We can put that .onion address inside of there, and the demo should work for us now. Now, it is not uncommon for Tor sites, darknet sites, to run very slowly. Again, remember that traffic is going, potentially all over the globe. You can see that in this particular case, this particular exit node happened to be, in Germany, and so because of that, probably our traffic is getting routed a couple different places. I'm trying to talk and to stall at the same time in hopes that this website will come up. We can go ahead and try a different one and see if we can make another one come up for us. I just want to kind of show you, let's go with this one here. Okay. All right. Nope. There we go. Okay. So that's right. I went to this one earlier. So in this case, you can see that the onion address that was on file by Darknet Stats is no longer in use. Okay. And so this is not uncommon, right? So you can see the primary URL is moving to a completely different onion site. They do that frequently, where they move around from one darknet site to another darknet site to try and try to throw law enforcement off or try to throw folks off, and so it's not uncommon for that to happen. And so let's see if I can zoom this in a little bit. So here on this darknet market site, you can see in this case, here's some drugs for sale, right? You can kind of see the prices of it, the grams, all the way down. Right, so not that hard, not that scary to go from how do we get to the darknet, going to some of these darknet sites. Now, obviously, what you do from here, how you handle yourself, this is no different than like going to a city or doing some other things that you may or may not necessarily be familiar with when you go to some questionable areas of the neighborhood or questionable parts of the city. And so traverse with caution, right? It's taking the gloves off. It's taking some of the bumper pads off of surfing the internet. And so with that in mind, I would definitely, encourage you to kind of just be aware of where you're going and how you're going there. You're not going to get in trouble for surfing the darknet. If you bump across something, like in this case, like a darknet market, you're not going to get in trouble for visiting a darknet market, right? That's not illegal to visit the website. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, but I don't expect the feds to come knocking on my door simply because I showed you this demo. With all that being said, again, to try to just really demystify the dark web. That's kind of what I was trying to get at with that demo. Hopefully that was useful. Hopefully you saw that, it's not that hard. It's not that, it's not that scary. It's actually something that if you're curious and interested in terms of how all that technology works, it's actually pretty, it's actually pretty interesting. This kind of gets us to the main point of this part of the segment, which was the dark web price index survey for 2020. So the market that I showed you, and in this case, this particular market happened to be, selling drugs. That's not the only type of market that's out there. Your personal information is for sale on the darknet, and I don't know how much more clearer to make it. If I probably could do another demo at some other point in time in a different stream where, actually go to some of these darknet markets and actually show you folks who are selling personal information, selling credit card information, selling passports and things like that. But the darknet markets that are out there very much are not just selling drugs; they're selling other types of activities. And so this price index that's put out by these guys at Privacy Affairs, I wanted to share this with you guys because here's a conversation that I have very, very frequently, folks, is the so what? So what my credit cards get stolen? So what my identity gets stolen? I've got to dispute a couple of charges on my account. The bank will take care of me anyway. It's not that big of a deal. And this gets back to kind of what we talked about on Monday's stream, where we talked about desensitizing the normal user when it comes to how their information is handled and the protection of their information by banks and whatnot and things like that. They don't typically understand what the value of the information that they have is to folks that are out there. And this is why I loved the price index for the dark web. And I wanted to share this with you guys because I wanted to kind of walk through just a couple of categories and ideas to kind of show you exactly what it is that we're talking about when we talk about what your value is worth. It's broken down by category. And again, I'll include the links for this, when we upload the video. Actually, I'll put this one in chat. This is one if you want to kind of peruse, instead of waiting for the video, I'll kind of throw this one. I'll kind of throw this one in chat for everybody to see. If they want to kind of peruse this one now. So if this doesn't come through chat, then let me know and we'll push it through all the different channels, but it should get to all the chats. But as you can see here, credit card data. All right, so when you look at it, it's category, it's product, and then an average price on the dark web for that, right? And so a cloned MasterCard with a PIN. So this is just your normal credit card. They've got a PIN for it. So this oftentimes happens when you go to the gas station or go to the ATM or even go to a point of sale system in the gas station or at a Target or a Home Depot or somewhere like that. You put your credit card in, and you push your PIN in on that keypad, there's a skimmer or there's a device that's taking your credit card number and watching you, type your PIN in at the same time, and it's taking both of those pieces of data and sending them off to a cyber criminal. We could do an entire segment on credit card fraud. There's a lot to talk about there with credit card fraud. Lots of different ones. You can see they even break down by MasterCard, American Express, Visa. And a lot of these are because like American Expresses typically have higher limits. And so this is, gives the cyber criminals an opportunity to kind of rack up more charges with an American Express than they do with some of the others. Card details that, that they can guarantee that the balances are up to $1,000 and $5,000 and whatnot. Stolen bank credentials. You can see payment processing services, which is, like PayPal's and Western Unions and things like that. We can get down here to the forged documents, driver's license. You can see that a high quality U.S. driver's license is $550. And so if you go to, an overseas location, or if you go to Mexico on vacation or something like that, and you lose your wallet and you lose your ID, you may have lost it legitimately just by misplacing or something like that. But it's not uncommon for those to have actually been stolen by thieves and pickpockets and then sold to other criminals and then then sold out on the darknet. That's an example of where a kinetic-based crime like just theft then makes its way into somebody who's savvy in terms of selling things on the darknet market and being able to go out on the darknet market and sell it from there. There's also a case where if you ever had to scan in your driver's license and send it to somewhere for verification, if that database ever gets compromised, then that stuff's up for sale. You can see, all sorts of hacked social media accounts. Social media accounts are huge. You can see kind of the price of like Facebook at $75. That's because of the amount of people you can reach. If you think about how many people you have on your Facebook page, how many people are following you on Facebook, if somebody were to get a hold of a hacked Facebook account, then they would instantly use all your entire friends list and kind of use that instant messenger function to instantly instant message all your friends and try to infect them with as much malware as possible. As a matter of fact, even on the corporate side, I've seen numerous incidents whereby an attacker will send a phishing email or something like that to an organization, and then as soon as they get access to that organization, they immediately use everybody in that person's contact list to send even more phishing emails outside of that, to try to, again, propagate their malware infection and whatnot. And so, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, obviously Gmail is pretty huge because most people store their passwords and their sensitive information inside their Gmail account, or they'll use their Gmail account to, as authentication mechanisms for their banks or their retirement accounts and things like that. And so you can kind of see, the values of those go up because of the value of the data that an attacker can get out of those things. You can see it goes down and talks about, average cost of malware, and then you kind of get down here at the bottom and you can kind of see, DDoS attacks. So a distributed denial of service attack. This is, one of those where you can pay to have a website brought down. So we saw this a lot. This may sound trivial, but, this is actually pretty lucrative for cyber criminals, right? Which is, you've got, folks who play Minecraft and run their own Minecraft server. And so as part of running that own Minecraft server, somebody may actually pay for a hacker or somebody like that to DDoS or to bring down somebody's Minecraft server. And you can see that, get paid pretty lucrative to have that type of a DDoS as a service. And so good resource. The kind of the bottom line here, kind of the WIFM or the what's in it for me for folks, right, is that your information is for sale in the darknet. There are people out there actively, not only stealing your information, but then also using that information, to turn a profit and to make more money off of. So, very, very real threat out there. Doesn't look like we have any questions inside of chat. Okay, we'll move on to our final topic for the news section for this evening, right, is that Google has introduced, its cloud confidential computing with confidential VMs. There's a whole lot of C's in there, Google. You probably could have done a lot better with that one. Kind of the bottom line up front for this one. One of the problems that we run into when we start to put data in the cloud, and if you listen to my podcast that I do with Insecurity, if you listened to it last week, we talked extensively about migration to the cloud and how there's a lot of movement into the cloud. And even on Monday's stream when we talked about a huge amount of adoption in the cloud arena. And with that, there's a renewed, I wouldn't call it a renewed, but there's an enhanced focus, right, around how do we protect data that's in the cloud. This gets back to kind of like the question that always gets asked is my data protected in the cloud? If I put my data in the cloud, is it protected? And when we talk about protecting your data, right, oftentimes people immediately go to encryption, and that's fine. We can talk about encryption in this case, especially when we talk about this confidential VMs that Google's coming out with. Oftentimes we can encrypt data at rest, or we can encrypt data in transit. So when we encrypt data at rest, we're talking about you have a file, that file sits on your hard drive, and you take that file and you put it inside of an encrypted container and you lock that box up, and you need a special key to unlock that box to get the access to that data before you can use it. Now, once that encrypted container is open and you pull that data out and you start to use it, it's no longer encrypted as you start to use it. So that's encryption at rest. When we talk about encryption at transit, this is when we talk about the internet, when we talk about some of the fundamentals of the internet, you'll notice, right, when we talk about, like you'll see websites that say HTTPS, right? S. That S is for secure, right? It's using a special type of security to make sure that when your computer talks to Google, the data that exists between those two endpoints is secure. It's encrypted in transit. And so for a long time, that's what we've talked about with encryption, was encryption at rest and encryption in transit. But what happens is, when I go back to my box example, when you open up the box and you pull that piece of data out and you start to utilize that data is no longer encrypted because you're using it. It's now unencrypted as you process it. Well, this is an amazing step forward in the sense of cloud computing, because now when you take that piece of data out of that encrypted container, it stays encrypted once it leaves that container, and all the while it's processing it, as it's processing it, it stays encrypted through that internal, processing mechanism before it moves on to another in-transit mechanism. So let's use an example of that. Credit card information is a huge one. When you swipe that card, those credit card numbers shouldn't, but sometimes they go somewhere and they get stored. Let's say that we take a credit card number, we store it inside of a box. You leave Amazon, you come back the next day, you want to swipe your credit card again to buy something on day 2 that you forgot to buy on day 1. Now, what Amazon could do is they could open up that box, pull out your credit card number, and once they pull it out of that box, it's now not encrypted. And so as they process your transaction and run your credit card again, that entire mechanism is now no longer encrypted, and then they'll put it back in the box and close it, and it'll be encrypted there. This confidential VMs allows inside the Google Cloud that when that box opens and they pull your credit card number out, it now stays encrypted inside the memory of that VM, and as that processing power of that transaction is happening inside of Amazon, it continues to stay encrypted. Once it's run your credit card number again, and it puts it back in that box, and then puts it back, in its encrypted container, and nowhere along does that clear text credit card number exist. And so this is huge for us. This is massive, because that was always the gap, right, that attackers would attack whenever they would, try to skim credit card numbers or try to infect machines. Is they always knew that at some point in time, that credit card had to exist in an unencrypted fashion, and that's when they were going to go swipe it. Okay, I just realized that I used an Amazon and a Google example to talk about cloud technologies when they're competing companies. So. Whoops. So this is huge. I think also when I look at this for those who are on the stream, who deal in kind of like the blue space or network defense or threat hunting and things like that, when I read this, I kind of have like another oh gosh moment, right? Which is like, man, if on these VMs, a piece of malware can now operate completely encrypted inside of memory, that's going to make it a lot harder to try to grab malware. Now, there's no cases of this. Nobody's proven this out there. Really, this is kind of brand new that's coming out there. But definitely something that I'm sure malware creators are out there thinking about is like, well, gosh, if we think about the EDR technologies that we have today, and so I'm not going to call it any specific EDR, right? But let's just take like CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, SentinelOne, and Cylance right off the bat, right? Their ability to do their job effectively relies on a certain amount of ability to detect what's going on in memory and how that stuff works inside of memory. If this prevents them from doing that, or is this a case that may prevent them from doing that? Is malware running completely encrypted inside of memory, preventing technologies like EDR, from doing that? Now, I did reach out to a couple of EDR vendors, kind of ahead of the stream, and kind of asked for, kind of their unofficial, off the books, response to this. And unfortunately, only one of them, I'm not going to name names, got back to me, ahead of the stream and let me know that they were looking at this and that they felt like, depending on, how an organization implements this and how it ends up looking, it shouldn't be a problem from their technology. But I think that also, is kind of underlined with a, kind of a comment of, yeah, they're aware of it. Yeah, they see it, but they don't necessarily know how it's going to affect their business model. And so there's two sides to this coin. It's obviously very good for organizations that have to pay attention to, protecting data, not just at rest, but at transit, but also as it's being processed. But it also poses an interesting opportunity for EDR vendors as well as malware writers with how that's going to change their business. So with that being said, I'm going to go back over to the chat window real quick. See what we've got here in chat. Okay. No new chats in chat window. So as promised, we are here on the schedule. This one right here. We're going to take our first break. I'm about a little bit over time, but we'll take about a 2 or 3 minute break. Everybody get up, stretch your legs, and we'll be back here in a little bit. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully everybody got up, stretched their legs, took a break. We just finished with this part of our stream, right? The cybersecurity daily news. We covered DNS and the new SIGRed vulnerability. We talked a little bit about darknets and the dark web price index survey for 2020. And then we talked about some of the new Google confidential VMs that are out there. Just as a reminder, we'll take snippets of these videos. If you missed any of those sections, you can go watch the full length replay on Twitch or YouTube, or just give me a day to do the videos and put them up, and you'll be able to catch the smaller segmented streams as we put those up. As always, if you like it, hit us a follow on Twitch if you're watching us on Twitch. If you're on YouTube, watching us on YouTube, hit us with a subscribe. You'll get a notification when that comes back. If you're watching us on Facebook, hit that like button. We stream here every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, discussing cybersecurity news and trying to demystify some of the topics from the cybersecurity space on a weekly basis. This is not this is not specifically oriented and targeted towards hyper focused to overly technical terms and concepts and things like that. It's we will cover some of those things. As a matter of fact, today we're going to dive a little deep into some open source command and control frameworks, which will be slightly more technical than what we're used to, but it's definitely geared to be a broad range of conversations, everything from how does my antivirus work to what is antivirus to how do these open source C2 frameworks work and how do I use them in my pen testing and red teaming framework. So as always, we're multicast streaming across 3 platforms. The chats are linked together. Hopefully that linkage is still working. I just checked in with my moderators and they were missing some of the chat streams. So, but don't hesitate to throw a chat in, throw a question in if something comes about. Hopefully I'll get to see it on my console here. If not, one of my other moderators will see it and throw you an answer. But welcome to the new viewers. We'll kind of jump into the second half of the stream. Where we talk about security through obscurity in 2020. So this one's going to be a little bit more high level. We're going to kind of talk through, something, kind of philosophical, right, if you will, when it comes to cybersecurity. It's something that we hear, we hear a ton. Let's kind of dive a little deep into it. So what is this concept of security through obscurity? When we talk about security through obscurity, the best way to kind of demonstrate, or the best way to really kind of talk about it, right, is if you're at your house, right, and you're trying to get into your house and you put a key to your house underneath the flower pot sitting by your front door, that's security through obscurity, right? In its simplest form, that's security through obscurity, right? Is that key is not really hidden, right? That key, if an attacker looked hard enough, they could find that key. It's also not going to stop the attacker from kicking in the door or breaking the window, as soon as they find the house. That key being under the flower pot, and let's call a spade for any of the network admins or whatnot that are out there, that key is for you, right? Because you don't want to keep your keychain with you, because you don't want to try to keep up with that key, or maybe you actually want to give that key to 5 of your friends so that they can all get into your house while you're not around, right? So in its simplest form, that's what security through obscurity is. There's a lot of other examples. If we were to bring those back to the computer realm, right? If anybody here, I do this in a conference or in a conference hall or in a convention center hall when I give these speeches, right? And ask this question, right? How many of you have password files sitting on your desktop? And nobody wants to raise their hand, but you can always tell by the looks that are going around from people out there that are like, are you going to admit to that? Are you going to admit to that? I'm not going to admit to that, right? But that's what happens, right? Is that we constantly, try to do things where we put our password files into text files onto our desktop. We try to name documents something, summer photos.txt, and then we put all our passwords there, thinking that an attacker is not going to look there. That's wrong. Number one, to think like that. Number two, that's wrong to try to put your passwords on a text file on your desktop. I can tell you that, I spent, 10 years in the United States Air Force with U.S. Cyber Command, doing, a lot of cool stuff, with U.S. Cyber Command. I've built red teams for Fortune 100 companies. I've done, thousands of penetration tests and thousands of offensive engagements, right? The first place we look is the user's desktop, right? And the first place we look is their documents folder. And the first place we look is their pictures, right? And what we are looking for is we're looking for those Excel spreadsheets or those text files or anything else like that have passwords in them. As a matter of fact, if there are red teamers listening to the stream, if that's not part of your post-exploitation checklist, I would make that part of your post-exploitation checklist is have you checked the common folder locations to look for any of these security through obscurity credentials. There's another example, and this one was brought to me by a security colleague here recently, and it's around API documentation. Most organizations these days are building fully extensible APIs. If you're not familiar with an API, it's an application programming interface. It allows programmers to be able to interact with an application without necessarily going through the graphical user interface. If you're building large complex systems, if you're trying to automate a lot of stuff on the back end, you really want to do a lot of that through an API, because an API makes your life a lot easier. It's a lot more. It allows you a lot more flexibility and allows you to do a lot more with with an application, to be able to interface through it with an API. We could do an entire conversation with API. As a matter of fact, when I go to survey vendors, and when I go to make purchasing decisions, or when I go to help advise people to make purchasing decisions on software, I very much encourage them to work with vendors that have very, very comprehensive, documented, public and open and extensible APIs, because that's the world that we're driving in, here recently. This engineer that that I was having a conference call with today, that kind of spawned this idea of doing this type of topic, was working on a piece of technology, and when he went to go read their API, it required a username and a password to get to their API documentation to be able to read their API documentation. And really that kind of spawned the question of like, well, what exactly are you trying to hide by putting your API documentation behind a username and password? And if there's anybody who's listening to this either on the chat today or even after the fact when we post these VODs up, if there's a realistic, logical explanation as to why somebody would put their API documentation behind a username and password, I'd love to hear it. But the conversation that we had was that had to be clearly an indicator that they were not comfortable with the amount of access that that API could have to that particular piece of technology. And so instead of fixing the security problems that existed with that API, instead what they did was they put it behind a password wall. And they said, well, if you're not authorized, then you can't look at our API documentation. And if you think about that for a minute, you're like, well what? And that's kind of what started this conversation, right? Should organizations put things like APIs behind credential walls? My thought, and thoughts of several people that I've talked with about this kind of leading up to the stream today, is the answer is no, right? Your API is how you gain access to the application. If I gain access to an application to perform a function and you're not stopping me with the appropriate level of authentication, then you're allowing me to do whatever it is that I want to do. And so if your idea of not being able to provide me with authentication when I go to perform a function on your API is to just block my ability to research your API and read your API and understand your API, then you really haven't fixed the security problem that exists with your API. That to me is security through obscurity, and to me, security through obscurity is no security at all. Let's talk about the password example that I gave with putting passwords and text files on the desktop. I explained to you how, as a pen tester or as an attacker, that's one of the first places we go to look for a set of credentials is those password locations. You haven't done anything to stop me as an attacker from finding those passwords. You've just put a barrier in the way that maybe I had to jump over or go around, versus actually, just giving me the access that I needed to. But why couldn't you, instead of just putting a paper barrier in front of me, Why couldn't you just do the right thing from a security perspective to prevent my access from that machine in the first place? Why didn't you have a host-based firewall? Why didn't you have next gen AV technology? Why didn't you have EDR technology with, alerts going into your security operations center, that would then trigger the incident response process? Why didn't you have all these other systems and mechanisms, that should be in place in a normal organization? Why are those things less beneficial or less secure than putting a text file on your desktop titled family pictures and putting all your passwords in there? I don't think anybody, out there can give me a good reason as to why that's the case. And so I think that's the challenge that I would challenge folks through when they think that those are great security strategies. I will flip the coin over, because I am a pragmatic, cybersecurity individual, and I'll talk about when is security through obscurity good. Security through obscurity can be good if it's layered with other security controls in place. And so what am I going to do with that? If, you have to put the key under the flower pot because that is the only key that will work, because, it's a special material, it's a special lock. They don't make that lock anymore. They don't make those keys anymore. There's something that you have to use that key and that key only to open the door up. But you have cameras on that key. You have a weight sensor on that key. You have a sensor on the flower pot. So if the flower pot gets lifted up and that key gets accessed, then it triggers an alarm, right? If you've got other controls around that key that provide you your preventative or your detective or your responsive controls, around an adversary, accessing that key, then those are times where, security through obscurity can be tolerated. I'll use a different definition. This is one for my risk folks out there, right? Is you've accepted the risk of having to leave that key under the flower pot. And by accepting that risk, you've put in other compensating controls, that allow that key to be there. And that's a time where security through obscurity could actually be, an okay thing for us to talk about. Here's what else I would say as well, right? And this is probably going to trigger any of the pen testers or red teamers that are on the stream, right? And I kind of hit on this on Monday's stream, when I talked about this on Monday, right? Is, there's a lot of security purists who are like, no, at no point in time do you put a text file on the desktop that has all your passwords in it. There's no point in time do you put that key under the flower pot, period, dot. We have to realize that in organizations, right, and especially the bigger the organization is that you get to, you can't help but run into situations to where you have to do things that your cybersecurity gut just wrenches at, okay? It happens. I promise it happens. If you work in financial services, chances are, as much as those financial services have tried to do better, there are mainframes. And those mainframes, if they're old, still have 8-character passwords that don't support special characters, and in some cases that I've seen throughout my career, don't even support uppercase, lowercase, type of denominations. And they're controlling billions of dollars of financial transactions on a day-to-day basis. And so, you can't force an organization to pay billions or millions of dollars to upgrade an AS400 that is that successful with them, that may bring down the entire consumer banking system on the back end. That's a completely different story. If you want to talk resiliency, I don't want to give anything away from our podcast for tomorrow, but tune in for our podcast tomorrow with Insecurity. And we'll talk about cyber resiliency, because it's a completely different conversation. But you can't escape that in an organization. Financial services isn't the only one. If you work in an enterprise that does manufacturing, when I talk manufacturing, I'm talking like they have manufacturing lines where they are building components, on a day-to-day basis for these multi-billion dollar, manufacturing processes. I'll tell you a scary story. I worked for a company, and again, I'm not going to disclose the company, but they had a brand new flagship product, and this manufacturing site for this brand new flagship product, it single-handedly produced $10 billion worth of product every day. That's billion with a B, right? $10 billion worth of product every day. The very first computer in that manufacturing line process, everybody sit down, take you a drink, get ready for this. That very first computer in the manufacturing process was a Windows 2000 computer. Most of us don't have cars that old when you think about it, okay? And when we started to dig into this one computer, all this one computer did was, as somebody fed a barcode in on one side, it read that barcode, put it into an Access database so that it could be tracked from end to end, all the way out to the consumer, all the way through the manufacturing process. If that computer went down and was completely unrepairable, couldn't be used, had ransomware on it, crashed, whatever the case was, that plant would literally be down for the entirety of that manufacturing process, and they would lose $10 billion a day. That is not something that is easy for an enterprise or organization to fix. And so I would definitely, you're definitely going to encounter scenarios throughout your career where you're going to have systems that you can't, really, touch, such as that. And this is why security through obscurity is a bad concept to have, in terms of just a normal security practice. But if you were able to build compensating controls around it, such as, if that computer were to be on a completely isolated VLAN, if that computer were to be, have some form of whitelisting protection on it, whether it's, folks who are familiar with the old Bit9 technology, or I don't think there's a whole lot of other technologies that are out there, but Carbon Black, kind of adopted that Bit9 technology. That whitelisting capability to prevent malware from being on it, if you were to isolate it through VLANs, those are compensating controls that you can do in the cases where security through obscurity is your only choice. And so, with that, that's kind of a small little, just kind of divergent on security through obscurity. With that, we'll take a pause. We'll take another 2-minute break. And then we'll come back and finish off our final topic for the night. Okay, everybody, welcome back. I was going to try to get into the last part of today's stream, which is the evolution of open source C2 frameworks. And I'll definitely get into that. But as ironic as this would be, we have some late breaking news. I don't have any graphics to show up, so imagine we're doing like, news alert, flash alert. Apparently, as I was finishing up that last segment, there were quite a few folks who were sending me text messages and whatnot, which I typically don't pay attention to on stream, when things are going on stream. But it looks like some of the things that I was seeing is it looks like there was potentially, this is late breaking news. This is literally, probably about an hour old news. But if anybody can see, can kind of see the stream, appears that even Twitter has come out on Twitter support and said that they are aware of a cybersecurity incident impacting accounts on Twitter. They're investigating and taking steps to fix it. We'll update everybody shortly. So if you're listening to this stream right now on July 15th, run out right now and change your Twitter password if Twitter support is saying that there is a security incident impacting accounts. And that's definitely one of those times where, make sure that your Twitter password is not the same as any other password. And then I would take this, pretty seriously because it looks like there is an ongoing hacking operation that's happening right now that's attacking Twitter. And even Twitter support is, look, they're saying down here, you may be unable to reset your password while we review and address this incident. So pay attention to your account if you're able to. It looks like as of 6:18, so it looks like it's about 15 minutes ago, they're continuing to limit the ability to tweet or reset your password and some other account functions. Just continue to pay attention to this, continue to monitor this. We'll continue to watch for it. We may throw an update up on our Twitter account as well. I'd go out there and follow at Twitter support here. But it looks like potentially Twitter may have been the victim of some type of cyber attack. So we'll look for some updates there, and that could be a pretty interesting thing to talk about on Saturday as soon as we know more details of. So, late breaking news. All right. So, getting into our last segment for the night, okay, before we call it good, we're going to talk about the evolution of open source C2 frameworks, specifically for pen testing or red teaming. This is one of those topics where when we talk about it, we're really talking about your ability as a penetration tester to mimic kind of the adversary that's out there. One of the core things that I very, very much believe in when I teach pen testing courses, when I teach other pen testers, how to do what it is that they do and TTPs and things like that. I very much harp on this concept of, simulating a real world attack. I think we get too caught up, with this idea that we don't have enough time in a penetration test to simulate a real attack, or we don't have enough time to stand up infrastructure, or we don't have enough time, or our scope doesn't allow for that. And quite frankly, I reach deep down in my pocket and pull out my BS card and I kind of flip that one over and I say that if you were doing the things that you needed to do as a simulated attacker, that would not be the excuse that you use. And C2 frameworks, I think the evolution of C2 frameworks continues to emphasize that and continues to be, an example of how we should, stop, relying on that excuse that we just don't have enough time for something inside of a penetration testing scope. And we should familiarize ourselves with some of the numerous and ever evolving pen testing frameworks that are out there, the C2 not necessarily pen testing frameworks, but the C2 frameworks that are out there, because those allow us to do better about simulating real world attackers. So, excuse me. So what is a C2 framework? Apologize. You can talk for an hour and a half straight. You eventually gotta wet that throat. Let's kind of talk about what a C2 post exploitation framework is. If you're not familiar with any of the frameworks that are out there, things like Kali Linux or Empire, things like that, not necessarily frameworks. Kali's not a framework. Kali's a distro. Metasploit framework, Empire, things like that. Definitely, we'll try to hit on a little bit of that to kind of level set, some of the new pen testers or some of the folks who are new to this space. Basically, a C2 or a command and control framework is something that allows us to have a node whereby, it effectively is a command and control node. It's where all of our agents that we have are basically going to call back out to. And so that C2 node, that C2 kind of headquarters, that mothership, if you will, has agents that you can then deploy to your targets that will then eventually call back to that C2 control node, and then you can kind of control your own pen testing botnet, if you will, as you go about doing your engagement. When you think about a C2 framework, I want you to think bigger than just your one engagement, right? I want you to think about if you've got 2 or 3 engagements going on, or if you've got a business model that allows you to run multiple pen tests with multiple different clients kind of simultaneously and together, and you're able to think and act very much like a cyber criminal, whereby you can create, your own C2 infrastructure, and you can then deploy these agents out, and then have them be part of your ongoing botnet, if you will. And the only difference between like you and a cyber criminal is that instead of you stealing, their credentials and their banking information and profiting off of it, you're showing them how it's done and profiting off of that. And so that's kind of the precipice behind, kind of what a C2 framework is. How does a C2 framework fit into our overall pen test methodology and our overall pen test strategy? If you look at not necessarily, the evolution, if you will, over the pen testing methodology. If we talk about, we started with, Backtrack, and then we started, with Metasploit framework. Metasploit framework's been around for a while. Metasploit framework at its heart was one of the first ever, C2 frameworks, right? It wasn't really distributed like a C2 network would typically be. Typically, you hosted it on one computer, or you could put it in the cloud on like a DigitalOcean box or something like that, and have your agents call back to it. But I mean, it was a centralized control point, and then you would, you could create Metasploit payloads, and then you could deploy those Metasploit payloads either through phishing or any other scenario that you wanted to. The concept of folks creating open source C2 frameworks has really blown up in the last 5 or 6 years, and I think we saw it about, I think it was probably right at about 5 or 6 years ago, when the guys on the West Coast, SpecterOps, Will over in the SpecterOps team on the West Coast, gave us the Empire framework, and I'll kind of talk through that in a little bit when we talk about that. I just want to talk about history, here for a second. The Empire framework. This was back when PowerShell was pretty, I wouldn't call it new, but using it to exploit networks and environments and things like that was still a relatively new concept. People weren't doing a whole lot of PowerShell logging. PowerShell v3 wasn't out that prevented a lot of the things that we're seeing now. And please don't get me wrong, PowerShell exploitation is still very, very, very big. PowerShell exploitation is still very predominant. So, saying that it's dead now is not a correct statement. But what the SpecterOp guys were able to do back in the day was they really pushed the boundaries on things that you could do inside of PowerShell. And they created what I would almost call one of the very first super mature C2 frameworks that were out there, whereby you could stand up a distributed C2 framework. You could have a legitimate certificate, for all your agents, and you could sign all your agents with a legitimate certificate. It ran solely on PowerShell, and you could deploy it. You could deploy, PowerShell one-liners via VBS scripts. inside of phishing emails, and it was highly successful. And then once you got that node to call back to your C2 framework, you had direct access to the memory, whereby you could run things like Responder, you could run things like Mimikatz to dump the memory, and it was so successful. And I kid you not, I've been now in several organizations and been part of incident response functions for quite a number of years now. The Empire TTP, and even in some cases, the Empire framework itself, has actually been used in organizations that I've seen as part of real active exploitation attempts against these companies. It comes up when you do end up catching it through either your EDR technology or something else. It comes up as a signature for the Empire, type of C2 framework, and so there's a massive push inside the community to start to create more and more of these open source C2 frameworks. And so as a result of that, a number of months ago, if I can find my Stream Deck here and hit the right button. So a number of months ago, about 12 months ago, right? These guys over at pentestit.com kind of created this entire encompassing list of C2 post-exploitation frameworks that were all open source. And what people started to do with a lot of these frameworks as we go down them, I'm going to pick on a couple of them. This is definitely isn't meant to be comprehensive going all. I'll include, actually, I'll go ahead and include the link here in chat for folks who want to kind of take this away from them, in chat right now. Obviously, it'll be in the video when I do the videos later, but this is the link for it now if anyone wants to take a look at it now. But this is a pretty comprehensive list of all of the categorized open source command and control frameworks that are out there. Lots of links to GitHub servers. You can see updates as things have been updated on their GitHub pages. You'll come down here and you'll see a lot of them are written in different languages. You'll find some that are written in Python. You'll find some of them that are written in this case, this one, Kodak, is written in VB script. Merlin is a HTTP cross-platform C2 server, all the way down throughout the list. And what the idea here is, and this is why I wanted to do this segment, right, is because this is your opportunity as a pen tester to separate yourself from the crowd, right? Your ability to be able to look at this and add these C2 frameworks to your toolbox, and then to be able to, during your recon phase of your engagement, be able to, through the identification of their countermeasures, through the identification of the technologies that they have in place, maybe as you're doing your recon, you're identifying what mail server or what email protections, whether they've got Proofpoint or Ironport or any of the other email protections that might be out there. Through that type of open source reconnaissance, you're able to really tailor and customize the C2 framework that you may choose to use to the environment to be successful. And so that's part of that tradecraft that I would encourage pen testers that are in this space to really start to focus on is, pick a couple, learn them, figure out which ones you like, which ones have capabilities that are good for you, and do the same thing that you would do with a tool in the toolbox, whereby you learn it, you understand how it works, you understand the situations that it works in, and then you stand it up and you play with it and you get really familiar with it. You start to code it into some of your TTPs as a pen tester. And then what you end up with is you end up with pretty good expert in those frameworks, and you end up understanding scenarios where they can be good or where they can be used and things like that. And on that same vein, I just because I gave an homage to the guys at Empire, you'll see here that they do list the Empire project. The original Empire project that was done by the SpectreOp guys a couple years ago. They decided to move on away from their heavy focus on PowerShell exploitation. They had felt that through their work with Microsoft and through the teams that they had been working with, that they had kind of pushed the boundaries as far as they could in terms of PowerShell exploitation. And so they kind of backed away from from Empire almost completely. And so the old Empire PowerShell post exploitation framework has pretty much been deprecated, which was a shame because at one point in time they had created not only that it would work on Windows, but they had created an entire framework that would also work on OS X and for Mac devices. Luckily enough, and these guys here, BC Security, they've kind of picked up the project, and they've got a lot of folks here. This is, and I find it ironic as we were just now talking about Twitter and possible, Twitter attack. Obviously, it pre-staged some of these screenshots for you guys, but when Twitter decides to get done with their cyber attack, how dare they interrupt our stream with their cyber attack? Go out there, find these guys at BC Security if you're interested in seeing their revamped version. But they've picked up the Empire code, and they've kind of started to keep up the legacy of Empire. They call it now Empire 3 as a post exploitation framework. It includes a PowerShell agent. And goes through and they continue to keep it updated, and they continue to use it. And this just shows how awesome really this framework is, and I harp on it because I actually do endorse this framework. I think this framework is an amazing framework, and these guys have gone actually a step further with their PowerShell framework, where they've created this GUI called Starkiller. And so if you're familiar with Cobalt Strike, and kind of what the old Armitage interface used to look like for Cobalt Strike, Starkiller is almost kind of like a revamp and a revitalization of Cobalt Strike and Armitage, and really starts to bring, I don't want to call it that script kiddie GUI feel to it, but when you're controlling potentially tens or hundreds or even thousands of nodes, if you're running a big shop of organizations, it makes it easy for you to visualize the attack framework across all of it. Also, we were talking earlier about APIs and kind of the extensibility of APIs and whatnot. And so the API of Empire is actually very, very well done. And so one of the things that I've done before in my past is you can take a SOAR tool, so a security orchestration and automation tool, something like Phantom or Demisto, Simplify. I actually did an article on LinkedIn, if you find my LinkedIn page, about an open source security automation tool. But if you take any type of security automation tool that has the ability to, through Python, through some type of programming interface, interact with one of these C2 frameworks, either Metasploit, either Cobalt Strike or Empire, whatever the case is, you can actually do a ton of automation inside your C2 environment. I can hear all the hackers on the other side of the mic going, "Ooh, automation!" He said automation. But think about it: if you're trying to exploit on a massive scale, there's actually a lot of benefit to clicking that button, having your entire C2 infrastructure get stood up through automation, having it generate its initial set of payloads. Even when you get that callback, right? You get that initial callback, having some form of automation happen on the back end when you get that callback from that agent, whether it's, escalating privileges, whether it's, inserting Mimikatz into LSAS and dumping LSAS credentials, whether it's setting up short haul and long haul communications. And if we really wanted to get into how to set up, and actually I probably could do an entire stream on how to set up a really, really APT-like, command and control infrastructure for penetration testing. All that automation reduces your manual effort that you have to do in those initial parts of a pen test that are really just kind of repetitive and mundane and just normal business as usual type activity, and gets you quicker to action on the target box, right? Remember, your quicker to action is what's important. And so if you can have automation, escalate privileges, dump LSAS, set up short haul communications, set up long haul communications, and set an arrest period until you, as the pen tester, are ready to interact with that agent, you run a higher risk or a higher benefit of being able to dedicate more time to doing your post exploitation, looking for password files, being able to go after domain controllers or whatever sensitive data you're trying to go after for your objective based test. That's where your value is, or that's where your value should be as a penetration tester. And so lots and lots of opportunity there. So again, open source C2 frameworks, fantastic resource. Would encourage folks to add this to their toolkit arsenal, start to play with it, and get to be pretty proficient with it. Okay. With that, I haven't seen any questions kind of come across the stream. If there are questions, it looks like no. Looks like there's no questions. It looks like we hit all of our topics. I'll kind of do a really long closing for today. Appreciate everybody tuning into the stream. Had a good turnout for the stream today. We're going to continue to do these. Stream will run every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. We'll continue to bring meaningful, actionable cybersecurity news, demystifying cybersecurity for everybody here, and we'll continue to try to keep this relevant for everybody. In the meantime, if you've got suggestions, feel free to drop them in the comments, either on YouTube or here on Twitch. Find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. You can drop comments to me there. My DMs are open on Twitter. Accepting all connections on LinkedIn. You shoot me some suggestions there. But with that being said, stay safe. Have fun out there. Cheers.